This is Matt Coyne, host of The Cheap Seats. Thank you for listening to the following broadcast here on Public House Media.
I'm the Greg.
And I am Dave Show.
We host the Greg and Dave Show on Public House Media.
Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out our show, The Greg and Dave Show, where we talk about strange, bizarre, and sometimes just downright quirky news stories that you may not have heard about.
A new show comes out every Wednesday. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes. And hey, thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppy. Find out more about me at DanielPoppy.com. Poppy is spelled Poppie. There is no howtowritegood.com. Dang it, I shouldn't tell anybody that. I should snag that when I have the chance. Or do I really care? If you enjoy this podcast, you can check out my website. You can also check out Public House Media. They are the host of this podcast, I guess you could call it that. You would call it a podcast, but I guess you'd call them a host. I don't know what you'd call them specifically. But you can check them out at thephmedia.com. We are actually going to jump right into everything. I have a quick announcement first. So I said that there were a lot of things that I wanted to change. July has just gone by extremely fast. So this is going to be going out August 1st. I'm not recording this on August 1st specifically. But so I'm recording this a little early. But July has been really, really busy. And I thought that I was going to get so much more stuff done. It's kind of weird how that works. I thought I was going to get tons of stuff done. I just haven't been able to get as much stuff done as I thought I would be able to. Because I'm in multiple classes. Or I just finished up one class. And I still am going on another class. And I have to pick up another class. So I thought that I'd have all this time. And I have a lot less time because I'm in classes at the same time. So I hope to make a lot of changes still. I'm trying to shoot for September to get everything set up, so everything's going to be changed. I hope to have a different format somewhat. I'm still going to be talking about stuff similarly to the way I do. Still going to have a guest on every month. I hope you enjoyed Evan this past month. I thought it was a lot of fun talking to him. I know the audio for him was a little odd. But besides that, my book is now out. I know that I said my book would be out 2 weeks ago. I said that it was going to be out for free. It is now out for free. So if you're listening to this and it's August 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th, you can go to Amazon. You can look up my name, Daniel Poppy, Poppy spelled Poppie, and then you can get that book for free. So do that if you haven't already. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I need to do that right now because it's a free book. It's not going to be free for forever. It's only going to be free a few days. It's only going to be free until August 1st. Until August 5th, so hopefully you have time to grab that, and then you can read it, and then you can be like, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. There we go. So the word of the week, because it's going to go along with our accidental lessons, the word of the week is corporation, and corporation actually comes from the Latin word corporare, which means combine into one body. And then it goes into late Middle English, which essentially means the same thing as corporate, right? Corporate and corporation are related. So that is what we actually are talking about today. So today for How to Write Good, we are talking about why a lot of bad stuff is coming out in the media. So by media, I mean movies, I mean music, I mean art, and different things like that. So why is it the case that a lot of crap is being produced? Now, before I start this podcast, I'm going to have a lot of stuff in the notes, and I'm probably not going to talk about it directly, but I'm going to get to a few things. I'm going to get to a few things related to it, but not maybe directly about it. A few things. One thing first is I do not think all the movies coming out are bad. So just let that be understood. I don't think all the movies coming out right now are bad. There's a few movies I'm looking forward to in the future. On them, I'm looking forward to Shazam. I do not like superhero movies. This actually looks like a fun superhero movie, and it's kind of different than the other ones. I'm sick of them. There's too many of them. This one's new, and it's just a different take on it. And I think the character is going to be really interesting. There was another movie I was looking. There were a couple more movies. Oh, I'm looking for. There's a movie, and I just saw it was coming out called Glass. So if you've ever seen the movie with called Invincible, I believe it. No, it's called Unbreakable, not Invincible. It's called Unbreakable. It has Samuel L. Jackson in it, and it has, gosh, what's his name? I can't remember his name on the top, but look it up. Unbreakable. Samuel L. Jackson is in it. Samuel L. Jackson plays a guy who it has brittle bone disease. And it's about superheroes in the real world. And I like it because it's really, really subtle. So I want to see that movie, and there was one other movie I wanted to see. So it isn't that there aren't any good movies coming out. It isn't that there aren't any good movies that are on the horizon. It isn't that there aren't any good movies that have been made. I saw The Darkest Hour. I liked The Darkest Hour. I thought it was really good. And there's other movies as well that I've seen in the recent past. But in general, this is what happens with me and my wife. We disregard all the superhero movies, first of all, because I don't want to watch a superhero movie every time I go to the movies. All right? Disregard the superhero movies. I do not want to watch a reboot. I do not want to watch a superhero movie because superhero movies are the same stinking thing. I mean, every story is the same stinking thing, but superhero movies are essentially the same stinking thing every single time. Okay, with some variations. And you could say that every story is the same exact thing, but superhero movies, I don't know. It's just the same content, the same characters. Give me something new. When my wife and I decide to go to the movies, we look through everything, and at the end of looking through everything, this has happened multiple times, we're like, well, guess we're not seeing a movie because there's nothing interesting to see. This is kind of the same way I listen to the radio. So I don't listen to the radio very often, but when I am forced to listen to the radio, I turn it on, I scroll through stations. If I want to listen to some music and I don't have any other way, that's why I'm forced to listen to the radio. I scroll through stations, and I get through the stations, and I go through all of them, and all of them are music that stink. And then I shut it off, and that's how it works. It's kind of similar if you are in a modern art exhibit. You walk through the modern art exhibit, you saw somebody who took a knife and they cut a, what's it called? You paint on it. A canvas. They cut a canvas. I had to jog my own memory. They cut a canvas, a little slit down the middle, and they call it art. There's nothing to it. And you walk by 17 of those, and you're like, well, what's this crap doing here? So there's the first thing I want to talk about for why I think that this happens, why we see a lot of bad books especially, but I think this also goes with movies and different things like that. But the first thing I think that happens with books specifically is that people they start to get paid money. If I can actually talk, then we can get this out. People start to get paid money, and when you pay somebody money, it's more difficult for them to be creative. They actually found there's a study done with kids, and if they do something they like doing, so if they actually don't want to do stuff if they're paid money, it's because it's turned into work. But you give them something, they do something they love doing. So say a kid likes eating sand, because kids like eating sand, and you start paying that kid for eating sand. Well, eventually that kid will not want to just eat sand. Now, I think this is two things. First of all, there was the intrinsic joy of eating sand, because we know eating sand is this amazing thing. When you pay somebody, you're saying, hey, because you're making this and you deserve this because you're making it, right? So the kid, if he doesn't see that money, he doesn't eat sand, right? At the same time, eating sand turns into work. It's hard work, people. Eating sand is hard work. So kids don't want to do it anymore. If you start to pay kids for things that they enjoyed in the first place, they don't like it anymore. I don't know how the research is on that right now, but a few years ago, that's what it was looking like. So if it changed, you can tell me. Go ahead. Now, the reason I think this happens, let me explain what I think happens first. I read books, I read an author, and then I read some of their first stuff, and their first stuff is dynamite, right? And then they go on, and they keep on going on, and then you notice that it kind of just turns into a job for them. And they kind of lost their edge. And the reason why I think they lost their edge is because they got comfortable. And this relates to the rest of what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about creativity in the corporate machine, but this does relate to creativity in the corporate machine. So don't worry, it all connects back together. But they lost their edge, and the reason why they lost their edge is because maybe they started making $100,000 a year. Let's just say that. That's a lot. That's a lot as a writer. Most writers don't live off of what they write, actually, because there's tons and tons of writers, of course. But say they make $100,000 a year. They suddenly get a New York Times bestseller. It's awesome. It's great. They're doing really well. They're like, man, I put so much work into this, and I just had to work on this forever and ever and ever. And they got a book deal, and they're like, well, we are going to publish your next 10 books or whatever it is. And they are selling millions upon millions of copies. Let's just say that that happens. Because, if you're with a regular publishing house, you get 3% of that check. You sell a book for $20. What's $20 at 3%? $20 at 3% is $6, right? Something like that. No, $20 at 3% isn't $6. It's like 60 cents. I think. But I'm really bad at math. So if that's incorrect, tell me. I'm really bad at math. Honestly, I am. So what happens, I think, to writers is they get complacent. They write that first book and they're hungry. It's kind of like if you watch the Rocky movies, there's like this story arc. There's this character change in the character. In the first movies, he's really hungry. Like in the first movie, he's super hungry. Like he's like, I'm gonna fight and I'm gonna do this and I'm going to not get knocked over. I'm not gonna get knocked out in this fight, and he doesn't get knocked out. And in the second movie, it's good because he still has that hunger and he keeps on going at it. But in the rest of the movies, he kind of slumps off a bit. He gets beat up because he doesn't stay hungry, because he gets his victory and he gets lazy about it. And that's what I think happens to writers. So they get their victory and they get lazy, but it's not the same thing. Well, it is the same thing with a fighter and a writer, okay? To be a good writer, you have to get outside of your comfort zone. I'm convinced of this. Now, I don't think I'm the best writer who has ever existed. I don't think I'm the best writer alive today at all. I'm probably not the best writer of anybody I know, but I know that if you want to be a good writer, you have to get outside of your comfort zone. You have to. I realized this pretty recently. And if you don't get outside of your comfort zone, you are not going to write as well. Because how it works is you have experiences, you distill those experiences through you distill those experiences, and with any type of art, then you're bringing those experiences out in what you're making. Well, eventually you're going to run out of things to distill if you don't have any more experiences. If you have the same exact day every single day and you're not trying different and new things and things that make you nervous and things that scare you, it's eventually going to be the case that you run out of the things, and then you're going to have one book that looks one way, and then you're going to have another book that looks the exact same way, and it's not going to bring up anything new, and it's not going to be interesting anymore. So that's what happens to writers. I think that happens to other artists too. Because we got to get that S in there. I'm having a hard time with S's right now. Yeah, so does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. So how does this connect? Covering up my mouth. How does this connect with corporations? Well, I think it's a similar thing. Okay, so what are big companies made for? So big companies that generate creative things, what are they made to do? Well, anytime you have a company, it has a bottom line, and the bottom line is making money. So what happens when you connect a author to this thing that's made to make money? Well, first of all, let's think from the money perspective. So to actually make a lot of money, you do have to take risks. So this is kind of a counterintuitive thing that happens. So any company that is making good movies is actually taking risks to a certain degree. That's what I actually think. If they're actually making really good movies that connect to people and are doing new things, they're making risks. Now, people who are making Star Wars and superhero movies are not taking risks. So if they're good movies, they are not taking risks. Okay? I don't think they are. But a company is trying to mitigate risks, right? So they're like, okay, we are trying to make a lot of money, but at the same time, we have to balance our risk and reward, and we have to balance that out. It's any type of investment you're doing. And I believe that the people who are in charge of the money, the producers and the people behind everything, the people who are running that corporation of whatever it is, whether it's a film studio, whether it's a publishing company, a lot of these are saying, hey, we have these types of books on the shelves, and this is the type of books that sells. Therefore, we must sell this type of book. And if we can fit things into these little boxes of books that are already selling, then it'll be excellent. There's no room outside of that. So this kind of runs into story, right? This kind of runs into what I'm doing with my book. So with the book that I have out right now, it doesn't complete the story. It actually begins a story arc. It begins a story arc that is not necessarily ending just at the end of the whole story, but it's a story arc that it will go through. It will end at the end of the story, but it's completely satisfied at the last book. Now, this is outside of that box. That's why I decided to self-publish, because I don't think it would ever be publishable. I don't think that anybody would pick it up, honestly. That's outside of that box, but that is a risk. Now, I'm taking a risk doing something different. When an author runs into... Because I have some experience, because I've done a lot of research, and I've kind of been in this sphere for about 5 years, which is really weird to me. I've been in this writing sphere and this publishing sphere for about 5 years. And what happens, this is how you get a book published, traditionally. You write your book. You revise your book for 50 years, or however long it takes you to revise your book. You better revise that book according to a regular story structure. So Hugh Howey is out of the picture. If you know who Hugh Howey is, well, if you don't know who Hugh Howey is, check him out. So what he did is he had multiple stories. Well, he did follow a story structure, but he had vignettes. So he had a book. He has a book called Wool, and there's 3 short stories in Wool, but it tells a bigger story. So technically, in his short stories, he did follow that structure, but in terms of the entire book, he didn't, because he doesn't have a central conflict to all of those, I believe. Maybe he does. I haven't read the book, so don't quote me on that. But from what I know, there are different things, and they're all kind of connected together in the same world, and people liked it and sold like crazy. But what you do after you revise your book and edit it, and you have somebody look at it, you have like 15 people look at it, or 30 people look at it, and they tell you what's wrong with it, and then you fix that stuff, then you go to an agent, and then that agent, from that agent's mind, that agent is thinking, this book needs to be able to sell. So I'm looking at whether this book can sell, and I think agents are a lot more generous than what they want. They try to be more generous than they actually are. Let me rephrase that. They want to be more generous than they actually can be. So they want to take on a lot of books. They want to take on a lot of authors, but they can't because the what do you call it? The market. I'm a little tired right now. I'm sorry. The market is full of people, so they can't take on everybody. So they only can take on a certain amount of people. What that happens is then the agent says, this is marketable. I'll take it on. Then the agent goes to a publishing company that says, this is marketable. I'll take it on. Then they go through the process of telling the author what they need to change, what they need to cut. They go through content editing, which is essentially taking the story and changing it in a bit. And they're trying to fit it into that box. Okay? This is what if there is... Okay, let me rephrase that. To a certain degree, you need to do that if you're trying to sell something, right? You need to do that. But the issue, I think, that happens is you have people who don't actually know what they're doing with story, and they're trying to fit it into that box. Now, not everybody, but in a lot of cases, I think there's just a lot of people who are like, well, our bottom line is money. This stuff sells. Clive Cussler, you've written the same book 64 times, but we'll take another book of yours because you sold a lot of books. You're a New York Times bestseller. People like your stuff. It's a safe bet. And that's kind of how it works. With film studios, it kind of gets even worse because they have tons and tons of people who have who have a say, or they may have tons and tons of people who have a say in how that movie ends. So you've got the writer first. The writer starts it out, and honestly, should probably just stick with how the writer wrote it, right? Because the writer is the writer. Writers get paid crap in Hollywood though compared to other people, but they're writers. Come on, writers. You're a writer. Everybody can do your job. Being facetious. So you get the thing from the writer, and then the director changes it how they want. And maybe if an actor won't say something, an actor won't do a scene, then the actor they'll change that maybe a little bit. So you're changing a bit more of the nuance, and then maybe it gets done, and then they have to cut it up, and they have too much information. They have too much of a movie, so they have to cut it up, and they have to cut pieces out. They would have made it a better movie. But I would have extended it by half an hour, Lord of the Rings, and then it wouldn't have made it a better movie. It would have made you fall asleep. Come on, people, let's be honest. They put it back in anyway, but it would make you fall asleep. I can't finish those movies anymore. I'm too tired. After that, it goes to the producer, and maybe the producer doesn't like stuff, so they cut it up and everything like that, because there's a director's cut and then there's the final cut, right? Which is also a movie, by the way. The final cut is also a movie. And you get tons and tons of people. And there's this, what do you call it? There's a proverb. Would you call it a proverb? I'm not sure if you'd call it a proverb. It's called too many cooks spoil the broth. Is it broth? I don't know if it's too many cooks spoil the broth or whatever it is. But that's what's happening in film studios. You've got tons and tons of people putting their say into what something happens with something. And you've got the writer who has the initial vision, which is, you don't have to have the writer's initial vision, okay? But the director's kind of the writer in a movie. That's kind of how I see the director. And the director is the person who says, this is how everything's going to go. They take the idea from the writer and they make it happen. Okay, so there's more than just what the writer is saying in the movie. They're actually taking what's going on from the writer. So the writer has a small piece compared to a lot of other stuff, and movies take a really long time to make. But then you've got all these people messing around with it, and if you have more than just the director, it's pulled in different directions. One thing that might happen in a story is that there isn't a central conflict, or the central conflict is blurry, or it's not evident, right? And I think that when you have tons and tons of people going at it, and they're just doing whatever they want with the thing, or they have their own whims, they're like, oh, I want this in there, they have their own agendas, it kind of pulls at that. It pulls at the different parts of the story, and it loosens it up, right? Whoop, I just bumped my microphone. I'm sorry about that. It's pretty late. I'm a little tired. I thought I could do this without falling asleep, but if I start snoring, you'll know what happened. So they pull at it. So a story should be like a, what is it called? I'm really good when I'm writing. I don't have trouble with words. It's a really weird thing. I'm writing. I don't have trouble with words at all. It's not very often that I don't, and it's probably the case that I'm really tired, and that's why that's why I'm having trouble. But if you knit, you probably want your knitting. In certain cases, you don't. Let's just say you want your knitting to be nice and tight and together. Well, when you start pulling at those things, they get looser and looser and looser, and it breaks down the integrity of what you've knit, and that's kind of what's happening with the story. Now, with a published work, with a book, let's just say a book, right? With a book, it's not as bad because there's not as many people to deal with and people putting in their say. But with a movie, there's tons and tons of people. Now, I'm going to clarify this really quickly so that people understand what I'm talking about. With a movie, it doesn't matter that there's tons of people part of the movie, because you've got all the actors. Let's just say something like, what is it? World War Z, which wasn't even the original movie, by the way, because read the book. World War Z is a good book. It's a fun book. It's a good book. It's interesting. But with World War Z, you've got to have all those extras, right? You've got to have Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt was in World War Z, I think. And you've got to have all these different people involved in the movie. You've got to have the people who are doing makeup. You've got to have the people who are doing costume. You've got to have the people doing set design, lighting. You've got to have the people who are filming, right? You've got to have the grips, the people who hold the microphones and all that stuff. You've got to have the sound guy. There's a guy who's actually recording specific sounds in the movie, not just the microphones, but there's like, I don't know if they're sound technicians or whatever they are. You've got to have people who are putting together the scenes. You've got to have the director, the actors, all these different people. It doesn't matter that there's tons of people. It matters that there's more than one person in charge. And I think this is where the problem comes in. Now, it could be the case that there's a director who isn't a very good director, right? There's just somebody who's not a good director. They don't know how to bring something together. But I'm not a filmmaker, so maybe I'm completely wrong about this. But if you don't have a central vision, like a central vision comes from one person. An artistic vision comes from one person. You could try to create an artistic vision from two people, but it's going to be a lot harder than if it's from one person, because that person has all the ideas in their own head and they just have to bring them out. Now, if you have two people who are writing something, you need to do a lot more planning ahead of time than if you had one person, because the two people have to communicate the vision and figure out a vision together. If you read books about how to run a business, if you read books about how to run a big business like a corporation, it's kind of funny. They should learn this because these people are in a corporation, they're in a big business, but they don't see it, that you have to do the same thing when you're writing or creating something as well. When you're in a corporation, you need to share a vision, right, with everybody in the corporation to make the company run well. And if you don't share a vision, you've got issues. You might have people who just think what you're doing is stupid, and you need to change that so it can run the best it can. And in the same way, when you're making something creative, you've got to have a vision. You've got to have a vision, and because it's creative, it's a little different than if it's a corporation. With corporations, it's more concrete, right? You can sum it up in a few words. With something creative, with a story, you really need to see it in your mind and have it play out in the real world. So for me, I believe that you really have to have some central person leading what's being made, whether that be a movie, whether that be a piece of music, whether that be a book, whether that be an actual painting. Well, with paintings, there's only one person, right? So otherwise, if you don't do that, I think that it kind of ruins it, because it's pulled apart and you don't have a central vision. You don't have what's going on in it. And I just kind of lost my train of thought a little bit, people. Like I said, it's getting after 9 and I'm getting a little tired. So that's what I have to say. I think it really comes down to any type of, it's after 9 and I'm tired. Gosh, unbelievable. It comes down to any type of creative thing you're making. So it's really the prerogative of the person creating it, right? And I think you have to be willing to kind of jump, like I was saying on July 4th, you kind of have to be willing to jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down, because until it's finished, you don't know if it's going to be good or bad, right? Until you actually like put it out there and give it to people to read, or if you make a movie and you put it out there and you screen test, I don't know what they do for this. You don't know if it's going to be good or bad. You think it might be good, but you aren't really sure. So it's almost certainly going to be bad if you have tons of people making it. In the music industry, I think this is the same thing. There's a lot of people who are focused on the money and they're not focused on the actual music. And there are a lot of people who are pulling in different directions. And I'm not in the music industry, so I don't know this. But yeah, one thing I thought of, and this is kind of a tangent, in relation to this, is I was thinking about how in a lot of cases money and creativity are combined. What really needs to happen in these situations is there needs to be two separate areas. There needs to be a group that creates something, and there needs to be a group that sells it, right? And I'm sure in a lot of these cases there are, but I think in some there's somebody from the top with the money being like, hey, I want this in here. So then it doesn't end up the way you want it to. But yeah, in the end, just don't take risks. I mean, in the end, take risks. Gosh. In the end, if you want to do something good, take risks. Because there's this idea that you should have a backup plan. A backup plan is good. But if you do not take risks, you're not going to get anywhere. I really believe that. If you take really stupid risks, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you don't take a calculated risk, you're going to probably be mediocre. And at the very least, even if you are mediocre and you take a risk, you've taken a risk and maybe you'll learn something, right? One thing for my own life. So starting this podcast was taking a risk, because I didn't want to do this because I thought people would think I'm stupid. I thought maybe people do. Maybe people listen to it and like, what is he doing? That's fine. I was really worried. And the more I do it, the more people I meet or the more people I come in contact who do something that's creative, and I get their perspective, and I reach out to a lot more people. Before I started this podcast, before I started having guests on, I wouldn't reach out to people. I wouldn't just reach out to people to talk to them about creative things. But I've probably reached out to, 25 creative people, probably more actually, since I started having guests on. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. That's 8 months. Or 7 months, because it's August 1st. But like around 25, I seriously think that's about the amount. And doing something else creative and trying to put myself out there also does it. So I have a blog, and I reach out to creative people. I've been trying to get a different creative person to spotlight every single week. And I've been doing artists right now. So check that out if you're interested in some interesting art, because I put up some art that I like. Like, I put up stuff I like, and I'm good at judging art. Let's be honest about this. No, check it out. You might not like it. You might like it. I like art. It makes me happy. But I've reached out to people, and I've just been able to connect to people that I would have never been able to connect to before, and I've been getting more and more confident with stuff. And I'm not getting confident. I'm not thinking... So from my own perspective, I'm not thinking to myself, oh, I'm so great at this. I don't think that at all. What I think is, I might be really bad at this, but I could get really good. So that's what changes. So instead of thinking... instead of never getting your stuff out there and never being in a position where you can actually see if you're good or not, you actually put yourself out there and you get to see, because if people respond positively, that's great. And if people don't respond positively, then you can change stuff. I can't talk, let's be honest. If people respond negatively, then you get to change stuff, you get to get better. And you can't get better unless you get some feedback. And there's going to be people who are just bad at giving feedback or jerks. But even people who are jerky, I mean, I'm so much more confident about doing stuff like this than I was before. And this is so much easier than it was in the past. You can tell by how fast I talk, right? All right, we are going to jump to our logical fallacy of the week, because that's what we do. Our logical fallacy of the week is misleading vividness. So this can be used as a type of appeal to emotion. Think of PETA. What does PETA do? So PETA could describe what happens to a little dog, and they show you this really bad situation with this dog, and they're like, oh, like this dog, they shaved off his fur, and then they lethally injected it, and then they cut it up for food, because people eat dogs, right? And they have this really vivid situation they describe to you. And they try to use this vivid situation to kind of gin up emotions. And other people do this too as well. They try to gin up emotions in you to convince you of something, or convince you of the problem they're presenting to you. And it's relying on your emotions. So it's an appeal to your emotions, which is... I think that appealing to your emotions isn't always... It's not logical. Emotions aren't logical, but emotions have a place in what we do, and emotions are really important. And emotions are kind of a canary in the coal mine, kind of, because if you know that analogy, so they used to have canaries in coal mines because canaries would die first, and they would know that there was issues with the air, and then the people could get out, because canaries aren't as strong and hardy as people because they're little. I don't know if it's because they're little, because cockroaches are little. But this is what's happening. So I think that emotions have a part in an argument, but it's not just emotions. So it's like, okay, I guess I'll explain that some other time. So that's where I'm going to leave you. Honestly, like, if you're someone who is thinking, oh, I want to do something creative, you just need to start putting your stuff out, because even if you suck, then you'll know it, right? And then you can get better. And I don't know. I think that something really important is the fact that you are willing to get better. Like, you're willing to just look at yourself and be honest, because I've looked at myself in the past 2 months, and I have these points in my life where I'm just like, oh crap, like I didn't realize that I needed to do as much work as I did. And it's really hard to look at yourself and think that. And then I realized, well, I just got to get down and do the work. So that's all I've got for you this week. My name is Daniel Poppy, and as always, this is How Do I Say?